Hi everyone, welcome to everyone here in person and also to everyone watching us today via live stream. My name's Tara Tawa Windsor. I'm Schröder Research Associate in German here in Cambridge, for anyone who doesn't know me yet. And I'm really delighted to welcome Ijoma Mangold here today to speak about his literary memoir, Das Deutsche Krokodil, and its English translation, The German Crocodile. I think we are Ijoma's last stop on a little tour of England that he's been doing over the last week. Last night he spoke at the Cambridge German Society on the topic of identity politics, which will no doubt come up today, but it isn't our main focus today. We're really going to be talking about the book. Before we get stuck in, I'd like to say a few words to introduce Ijoma. So he was born in Heidelberg in 1971 and studied literature and philosophy in Munich and Bologna. I found a nice anecdote in Wikipedia that said that he worked in the call center for the subscription service of the Süddeutsche Zeitung while he was studying, but then has gone on to have a really illustrious career at various...
That was hard-earned money.
Yeah. Illustrious career at various German newspapers, including the Berliner Zeitung and the Süddeutsche Zeitung, before he moved to the weekly paper Die Zeit in 2009, where he was literary editor-in-chief from 2013 to 2018. And he's now Die Zeit's cultural political correspondent and one of 4 literary critics on the Südwestrundfunk TV show Lesenswert. He won the Berlin Prize for Literary Criticism in 2007, and he sits on the jury of many major prizes for contemporary German literature. So Das Deutsche Krokodil was published to much acclaim in 2017 with Rowohlt Verlag. In 2020, so a couple of years ago, he published another book called Der innere Stammtisch, ein politisches Tagebuch, also with Rowohlt. But last year, and this is the kind of, the occasion for our talk today, the translation, The German Crocodile, pictured here, came out, which was translated beautifully by Ruth Ahmedzai Kemp under the DAS, or Das Editions imprint of Digitalback Books. DAS stands for Discover Africa's Stories, and the translation was awarded the English Pen Award. So I've really enjoyed reading the book and preparing for today. It's such a rich and wide-ranging and multifaceted memoir, which connects Ijoma's own experiences and personal stories to wider historical and political questions, which are of great interest to all of us as students and scholars of Germany. The book spans his childhood and youth, growing up mixed race in 1970s Heidelberg, and his life as a young adult in newly unified Germany, but it also stretches back as far as 19th century Prussia, through the Second World War and the immediate post-war period, as well as taking the reader on his travels with him to the United States and Nigeria in the 1990s, and up to the present in contemporary Germany and also the UK. So, as I said, very wide-ranging and rich. It's a very witty book, but also very touching and poignant in many places, and compelling to read and often self-reflexive in its literariness. So hopefully we'll come to talk about most of these things or all of these things as we go. Just a quick note on the format. So Ijoma is going to read an extract from the beginning of the book, both in German and in English to start with. Then we'll talk about the extract and the book more generally between the two of us, before opening up for questions from the audience, if you have them. If you're watching online and you would like to ask a question, you can do that. There's an email address for you to click on beneath the live player. So please do send questions to that address, and my colleague Miriam will read them out on your behalf when we get to that point. So, without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Ijoma to read from the book.
Yeah, hello, I'm happy to be here and start just reading. First from the German original version, then from the English translation. It's the beginning of the book, so therefore I don't have to explain anything. Wenn der Junge das Telefon abnimmt, meldet er sich mit seinem vollen Namen. Manche Anrufer, die seine Mutter sprechen wollen, sind belustigt und ahmen ihn nach, als hätte der Junge in kindlicher Selbstverliebtheit etwas gesungen, das ein zärtliches Echo verdient. Wenn er seinen ganzen Namen ausspricht, kommt er auf 9 Silben. Sie haben nicht nur Klang, sondern auch Rhythmus, wie eine Wellenbewegung. Aber das ist nicht der Grund, warum er den Mund so voll nimmt. Es ist der Versuch, sein Schicksal abzuschwächen. Sein zweiter Vorname, das ist seine Hoffnung, soll die Exotik seines ersten Vornamens mildern. Ijoma Alexander Mangold. Wenn man es so betrachtet, steht es eigentlich 2:1 für Deutschland. Aber nur, wenn es ihm gelingt, den anderen die Existenz seines zweiten Vornamens in Erinnerung zu rufen. Er dringt mit seinen Versuchen nicht wirklich durch. Obwohl sein zweiter Vorname auf offiziellen Dokumenten, zum Beispiel auf Sporturkunden, auftaucht, wird ihm nicht dieselbe Bedeutung zugemessen wie seinem Rufnamen. Kein Zweifel, die Erwachsenen sind der Überzeugung, dass Ijoma der Name ist, der den Jungen am besten bezeichnet, obwohl alle erst einmal über diesen Namen stolpern. Das Stolpern löst bei ihm Schamgefühle aus. Das scheint die anderen nicht zu stören. Es scheint ihnen sogar ein besonderes Vergnügen zu bereiten, die unalltägliche Schönheit seines Vornamens zu preisen. Wenn der Junge dem folgen wollte, müsste er sich glücklich schätzen, nicht Matthias, Andreas oder Oliver zu heißen. Er sieht das anders, sagt es aber nicht. Der Druck, das spürt er, sich zu seinem Vornamen zu bekennen, ist groß. Seine Mutter hat ihm zwar schon mehrmals erklärt, er könne sich im Kindergarten oder in der Schule auch Alexander nennen lassen, aber einen regelrechten Namenswechsel kann er sich nicht vorstellen. Man kann doch den Leuten nicht sagen, sie mögen einen von jetzt an anders nennen. Was hast du denn? Warum willst du denn deinen schönen Vornamen loswerden, würde es dann heißen. So weit will er nicht gehen. Seine Mutter hat ihm erzählt, Alexander heiße er nach seinem Urgroßvater, der ein Schneider mit einigen Gesellen in Berlin gewesen sei. Immer wieder einmal ist von dem Urgroßvater die Rede. Der Junge hört diese Geschichten gern. Er schätzt seinen Berliner Vorfahren, der gewissermaßen eine schützende Hand über seinen zweiten Vornamen hält. Sollte sein zweiter Vorname immer weiter und weiter zurückgedrängt werden, könnte er sich zur Verteidigung auf seinen Urgroßvater berufen. Sein erster Vorname ist eine Hinterlassenschaft seines Vaters. Nicht die Abwesenheit des Vaters ist das Problem, das ist ein kleiner Sprung, nicht die Abwesenheit des Vaters ist das Problem, sondern die Spur, die er hinterlassen hat, die Zeichen, die auf ihn verweisen. Am meisten anwesend ist der Vater in seinem Vornamen. Wenn der Junge ihn nennt, kommt es fast jedes Mal zu Fragen, deren Beantwortung die Leute überhaupt erst darauf stößt, dass an den Verhältnissen des Kindes etwas komisch ist. Ach so, du hast den Vornamen von deinem Vater und den Familiennamen von deiner Mutter. Aus irgendeinem Grund fänden es die Leute andersherum einleuchtender. Solche Situationen kann man überstehen, sie gehen schnell vorbei. Wenn die Mutter nur nicht so einen Kult um seinen Vornamen treiben würde, welch ungewöhnlich schönen Klang er habe, dass er Glücksfall bedeute, dass er in Nigeria keineswegs exotisch sei, dass es den Wohllaut immer unterstütze, wenn ein Name über 3 verschiedene Vokale verfüge, dass dieser Name, in dem der Junge seine große Schwäche erkennt, nach Ansicht der Mutter nun im Gegenteil Anlass zu Stolz sein soll, das stellt die Dinge auf den Kopf. Aber der Junge sagt nichts. Ohnehin ist er überzeugt, dass sein Vorname gar nicht so viel mit dem Vater zu tun hat, mehr mit der Mutter und ihrem Hang, immer alles anders zu machen als die anderen. Sich einen Nigerianer zum Vater ihres Kindes zu wählen, auf die Idee kann nur seine Mutter kommen. Ein Familienleben durchzustehen ohne Vater, welche Frau macht das sonst? Und dann dem Kind auch noch einen Namen zu geben, der alles andere als eine Tarnung ist, das ist der Gipfel der Furchtlosigkeit. Now I switch to the English text, and actually by the next book I will write in a very simple German, so it's easier for me to read the English translation. Whenever the boy answers the phone, he always gives his full name. Some people who call to speak to his mother find this amusing and mimic him, as though the boy's naively narcissistic way of answering the phone merited an affectionate echo. It's very funny if you read your own text in a language and you only understand 80% of it. When he pronounces his full name, it comes to 9 syllables. The sounds and the rhythm pulse like a wave. But that's not the reason why he answers with such a tongue twister. No, this is his attempt to mitigate his fate. His middle name is his hope of tempering the exoticism of his first name, Ijoma Alexander Mangold. When you look at it like this, it's actually 2-1 to Germany, but only when he manages to remind the person he's talking to of the existence of his middle name. For all his attempts, it doesn't really work. Although his middle name appears on official documents like sports certificates, it isn't really given the same weight as his first name. The grown-ups clearly can't be dissuaded from the assumption that Ijoma is the name that best describes the boy, even though they always trip up when they say it. The way people stumble over his name is a source of grave embarrassment for the boy. It doesn't seem to bother anyone else. They even seem to derive a certain enjoyment when they praise the uncommon beauty. The logical conclusion is that he should count himself lucky he wasn't a run-of-the-mill Matthias, Andreas, or Oliver. He sees it differently, but he doesn't say so. He senses a great pressure to identify with his first name. His mother has told him several times he can call himself Alexander in kindergarten or at school if he wants to, but he can't imagine really going to the effort of changing it. It's not easy to tell people that from now on they should call you by a different name. What's wrong with you, they would ask. Why would you want to get rid of your beautiful first name? He doesn't want to go that far. His mother says he was named Alexander after his great-great-grandfather, who was a tailor in Berlin. He could listen to the stories about his great-great-grandfather over and over. He never tires of hearing about him. He is grateful for his Berlin ancestor whose protective hand hovers over his middle name. Whenever his middle name is pushed aside, he can defend it by invoking his great-great-grandfather. His first name is his father's legacy. It's not the absence of his father that's the problem. It's the trail he left behind, the markers that point to him. But it's in the boy's first name that his father is most present. Whenever he tells someone his name, it inevitably leads to questions, and it's the answers to those questions that draw people's attention to what is unusual about the boy's circumstances. Oh, so you have your father's first name and your mother's family name? For some reason, people expect it to be the other way around. These conversations are bearable enough. They are usually over quite quickly. But if only his mother didn't make such a fuss over his name. She never stops going on about how beautiful and unusual it sounds, that it means stroke of luck, that it isn't at all exotic in Nigeria. How nice it sounds when a name has 3 different vowels in it. This name, which the boy sees as a weakness, a flaw, is, in his mother's eyes, a cause for pride. This is what upsets him most, but the boy never says anything. In any case, it seems to him that his first name has less to do with his father than with his mother and her desire to be contrary, to do things differently, to choose a Nigerian to father her child. Only his mother would have that idea. To raise a child without a father, who else would choose such a thing? And then to give your child a name that does the precise opposite of camouflage, that's the embodiment of her dauntless character. Yes.
Thank you very much. And also thank you also for reflecting on what it's like to read a translation and to read another language. I think that's quite something that we can all it resonates with us as learners of another language as well, and exposing yourself and speaking in another language. But we'll come back to the question of translation in the conversation later on. As with all great books, the opening really sets up many of the themes and strands, obviously, that you then pick up on later on. And I will come back to that, but I wanted to start by asking you quite a broad question, namely, what was it that made you write this book in this particular form at the time that you did?
Actually, people think because it's a memoir and it's about deep psychological feelings, there must have been a need to express myself, something that was always bothering my soul. Now I could write it down and get it clear for myself. But the actual reason was completely different. I had a sort of a sabbatical, a professorship at St. Louis in the United States, and I had a lot of time because I didn't have to work for the newspaper. So I thought I would like to use this time for a different kind of writing, for non-journalistic writing, for narrative writing. And so I was sitting there in this American-style cafe where you can refill your bottle of tea for a whole the day, and was sitting on my laptop. And I realized, okay, usually if you write in a narrative way, you write fiction. Fiction is the proper form for this. And I realized that to jump into fiction is for me too big a gap. I didn't find out how to invent figures or persons. Even now I haven't. I still have the same problem. I like to write like a novel, but I don't like to invent something. If I invent something, in my ears it always sounds like I have invented something. I don't know how actual writers solve this problem. I think if I describe something I have experienced myself or I have observed in the world, I think, write about it quite beautifully, but it's convincing to me because I know I hit the truth of something I have observed. It's completely different if I invent something. Then I always think, oh no, that's a cliche. Everything I invent to me sounds like, oh, it's a cliche. So if you have this problem, you like to write like fiction, but you don't like to invent something really fiction. Okay, auto-fiction is the salvation, the solution of this problem. And when I realized this, I started writing down memories of my childhood. And at the beginning, it was about me and my mother, because my mother died in 2010. I started writing The Crocodile in 2015. It was what we call in German Trauerarbeit. The death of my mother was the biggest break in my life, and I realized after her death that a lot of memories came back to my memory. No, and I wrote them down, and at a certain point I realized, okay, now you're talking always about your mother and the son. The reader will ask, what about the father? And now, looking back to the book, it's strange that it started like this, because of course the story is about the absence of the father. But that was not my original intention. The book had its own dynamic and was driving me then into this direction. And then I realized, oh, it's true. If I tell the whole story, like my father went back to Nigeria when I was 1 year old, so I grew up without him. The first time I heard of him, I was 22 or 23, and then I traveled to Nigeria. Okay, and then I realized, okay, that's a perfect plot. And then it was easy to write it down.
Okay. Yeah, great, thank you. Yeah, life as a plot, and yeah. you do reflect a lot.
Life is always a plot, but you not always realize it.
Right,
that's
exactly.
the point. You have to look at your own life as long till you discover, that's the plot.
Right. And you do reflect a lot on the nature of storytelling and putting that together. But maybe we can come back to that. I wanted to maybe you mentioned that you started off that this was about you and your mother, and not least because today's International Women's Day. We've spoken that it would be really nice to to talk about her and her role the way that you kind of, you portray your relationship with her in the book. So the extract that you just read, you show your affection for her, but also your bemusement with her, and how she kind of always wants to stand out.
Yeah.
But you as a child are very kind of, my impression is that you're bemused by that, and you're also slightly ashamed and a little bit unsure about how to deal with that. And there's
Not a little bit.
Very then. But nonetheless, she's a very important person, obviously, for you. Yeah. So maybe you could speak a little bit about how your relationship with her kind of changes, and also how you write about her through the book, particularly as you've just called it, the way, it was one of the reasons you wanted to write about it was this way of working through your loss of your mother.
Yeah, I think the German Crocodile is a book about shame and embarrassment, mm-hmm. and how you deal with it. And of course, as a child, you have a different. As a child, I think at least that was the way I was. You have a longing for normality. You prefer it if everything at your place, at your home, is the same way as it is at the neighbors' homes. And from my view as a child, in my family, everything was different. And I would say the fact that I looked different and had a difficult first name was not the heaviest burden. The heaviest burden, I would say, was, in my view then, that I had a mother who did not fulfill any standards that were common. Mm-hmm. For instance, I mean, Germany in the 70s, that was the country of the automobile production. Cars were the status symbol. My mother hadn't have even a license, a driver license. So we had no car. We used bicycles and public transportation. At that time, that was nothing to be. We were not woke at that time. It was not like we were sustainability believers. No, we just had no car, so we had to use public transportation. I thought it's a shame other families drive with their Mercedes and we go to the tram. We had no television, which is also kind of an exclusion of the community of my class, because on Monday when you go to elementary school, everybody was talking about, I don't know, Wetten das, the Saturday night show, and I couldn't share that kind of conversations because we had no television. Only in vacations when I went to my grandmother, I was allowed to watch as much TV as I wanted, and so I tried to compensate this. And then, of course, the biggest difference was the fact that we were not a complete family. At that time, the expression of the single mother, which is now considered like a heroic idol, wasn't in existence. It was something very unusual, that a mother with a son. And no one ever was like insulting me or provoking me in that sense, not at all. But I had a deep intuitive knowledge that it is, if a mother grows up only with her child, it means she wasn't able to hold the father of his child. So the most common situation were women who had a sexual relationship with a GI. They usually, after World War II, went back to the States, and then you had a single mother, mm-hmm. very often with a dark-skinned child. Mm-hmm. That was not like things should be. It meant, I don't know, in German we have that word Flitzchen. Mm-hmm. I don't know, how do you say in English? Slut? No. But yeah. It's at least nothing bourgeois. Okay. And I remember that, of course, people asked me, is your father an GI? And I always were protesting very heavily, because as a child in my world, having an GI as a father, of course, was was worse than having a Nigerian father who studied medicine. Yeah. So I mean, we all live in a world of social distinction, And as a child, you don't know it in a conscious way, but you act like this. And you know exactly what kind of social value certain things have. And in a way, intuitively, I knew it's better to have a Nigerian father who studied medicine than an American soldier who fucks around and leaves the country. So all these things came together and led to this judgment, oh, I have a very special, uncommon mother, and I would rather not have such one. Of course, later on, when I was more mature, I realized when my friends then in high school came and they always said, you have such a great mother, she's so special, she's not a Spießer, how do you say Spießer? She's not a squared one, she's unconventional. All these were values they then reappreciated, and I realized, okay, my mother is not my disadvantage, but my advantage in a way. Because then, I mean, even the society had changed so much. At the late 80s, everybody tried the great social transformation to an individualistic society has started. In the 70s, we still were Industriezeitalter, industry period. An industry period like when Henry Ford built up his first factories. The idea was every family should live in the same house, have the same transportation to the factory, have the same mindset to fulfill the profile he needed for his workers. So being individualistic didn't fit to the industry period. That changed. In the 80s, individualism was the highest value. And when I finished high school, of course, everybody wanted to have an exotic first name. Everybody was happy to look different. Everybody wanted to be different. I think that was the slogan of Nike since the early 90s, be different. Is it right? I think so. Something with, yeah.
I'm sure, is it?
Be different is the, even in the world of capitalistic advertisement, in the late 80s, early 90s, it was clear being different, that's the true value. But that wasn't that was different in the 70s, and and that was my situation as a child. Maybe one last sentence, because it's very funny. In the English translation, there is my mother characterized with the word contrarian. And I realized that I myself nowadays like very much to characterize myself as a contrarian. In the German version, there is not this word. And now I realize, okay, maybe my own contrarian character is a complete legacy of my mother.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's something definitely that comes through in the book, is the ways in which you're very similar and the ways in which you're you are indebted to her in all sorts of ways. I mean, so but at the same time, through that very contrariness, you also want to kind of you have a backlash against her, and then there's an interesting tension there but you're also very protective of her and also very defensive of her as well. So you mentioned that it was this. I suppose it's the stories that are being told around you that give you the shame.
Not even that. At least those stories were not addressed to me. It was more in my imagination. I had a intuitive idea of people could look at us in this way, and probably they did, but they didn't tell it to me. So I was not confronted with it in a direct way.
Right, but that must have come from somewhere, even if it was kind of subconscious, and that's the surrounding narratives that you were picking up. But also that those things that you said were not bourgeois, but it was also your mother who introduces you to all the kind of things that have then shaped your life and your career later on, in taking you to the theatre, listening to classical music, having piano lessons, and you emphasise that she did everything she possibly could to make sure that you you had access to that kind of thing as well. Maybe let's come back to the theme and the motif of your name, because that was also interwoven with your relationship with your mother, because you talk about it being the choice being more about her than your father, your first name, and this expectation, again a societal expectation that in conventional families, we happen to carry our father's names, and it's the other way around, surnames, and it's the other way around for you. But perhaps you could talk a bit more about, your name comes up as a recurring motif through the book, and in different contexts, and that would be one way for us to also sort of expand through other situations in the book. For example, when you talk about it comes up in a Latin lesson. And also then later on, once you go to Nigeria, so maybe, and also when your father gets in touch with you, you talk about how he spells your name. So there are various points when it sort of like comes up as something that's constantly under discussion in your life.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, the situation with my Latin teacher is very typical even nowadays. 3 weeks ago, I don't know if you know the French writer Emmanuel Carrère. I admire him very much, contemporary French writer. I was visiting him 2 weeks ago in Paris, and we had only email communication before. And he gave me his address. I walked up the staircase to his apartment, and he was standing in the door and seeing me, but he was like looking through me. And I was a little bit irritated because we had an appointment, and I was like 2 meters in front of him. So I thought he could be kind and say, hello, Mr. Mangold. But he was like, there must be another person coming behind me. And then he realized his flaw and said, I thought you were a woman. And of course, everybody who is reading only my first name thinks I'm a woman because of the A ending. And that was, when I was a child, I was ashamed of it, of course. And I remember one situation which I felt actually as a relief. Nowadays, it sounds absolutely ridiculous, but in the 5th Klasse, how do you say, fifth grade, when in Germany we changed from elementary school to high school. In the first lesson, everybody had to say his name, and when that Latin teacher was confronted with my name, he was obviously irritated, and he was thinking for a second, and then he was smiling completely over his face and said, that is not that unusual. We have also a Latin word for peasant, agricola, which ends with an A, but is actually a male, a masculinum. So my Nigerian name was in a way, I don't know, I can express it in English. In German I say, mein Name war gerettet durch den Segen des Lateinischen. Thanks to Latin, he had an explanation why my first name also could be male, like agricola. And that was very well intended by him. It was his attempt to integrate me into the broader Latin empire, I would say. But nowadays we would think, oh no, that is, I think we would say it's racist. I don't know, but I guess so. So I always had to live with this A ending. I mean, people are ridiculous, and also I am a ridiculous person, and I confess to you something. Only because it's in England, no one knows me. In Germany, I've never talked about it. When I started writing as a journalist, very young, like 25, when I still was a student, I used as my name Ijoma, middle initial A, point Mangold. And the middle initial is not very common in Germany. And my idea was, if the reader sees that A, the reader starts thinking for which name could it stand. And then I thought, somehow he thinks, maybe Alexander, then this guy is a boy, is a male. So it took a while to overcome it. When I really started as a professional, then of course Alexander doesn't play any role anymore in my life, but it was a challenge, obviously. Yeah, and the second experience related to my name situation was then in Nigeria. When I traveled to my father's family to Nigeria, usually they live like one part of their life in a big city, and then there plays a major role the village they come from, where my father also, Amuche is the name of the village my family comes from, where my father was a chief. And I had the strange situation that during the time when I traveled to Nigeria, my father actually wasn't there because he had a kidney disease, and he needed dialysis. Dialysis. And now he had the chance to make a kidney transplantation in Germany. So he actually was in Germany. I met him the first time in Bochum, and traveled with my oldest sister, Ikuna, who studied at that time medicine in Heidelberg. We traveled together to Nigeria. My father said, most important is you know your fatherland, that I'm not there doesn't play a role. The whole family is happy to meet you, and all your sisters, I had at that time four sisters, they can't wait to see you. So I arrived with Ikuna in Nigeria, stayed with the family, the then wife of my father, Joyce, I like her very much. And when we traveled to that village, in a way everything changed, because going from the city to the village is like going back in time, going back to even more patriarchal structures, to more traditional habits. So all the honorable people of that village, who usually also live in Lagos or in other big cities and are very enlightened persons, if they return to the village, they take over old role models. So they were like celebrating a feast for me, returning of the lost son, and it was quite, in a negative sense, impressive to me, because, I mean, we are in the middle of the jungle. In the village, I don't know, at that feast there were like 100 people. That's a mass. 100 people who are building up a community with one mindset, and you're the one who has to suffer certain things they do with you, and you know you cannot run away. Where should you run? There's no public transportation. And one of these honorable men were holding a speech with very grand words, and the essence was addressing me, forget the name Mangold, you are an Essebuike. And Essebuike is the family name of my father. And I couldn't contradict in that situation. I mean, it was, of course, also I knew it's a ceremony, it's nothing, it's not an open discussion about which family name fits better. It's just like, yeah, these kind of speeches. But at the same time, I felt very insulted, because I thought it's an offense against my mother. I mean, my mother it was my mother who had brought me up for 22 years, who financed this expensive child for 22 years by not having very much money. And then this stupid guy says, forget the name Mangold, your real name from now on is Essebuike. So that was like the saddest moment of my Nigeria journey. And the wife of my father, who was very sensitive, she immediately realized what went wrong, and during that speech already she went to me and said, don't take them serious, that's the way they act when they're in the village. But for me it was I didn't like that situation. Yeah, and it was again had something to do with my name, and of course even a third aspect. And we were talking about it while walking to this place. We share this experience, and I think for me, I realized it's a great chance. Usually, people are forced into a tradition, the tradition of the language their name comes from. If I'm a German speaker and have a German name, for instance, I don't know, what's the German name, Andreas, I have to pronounce it the way the speaker community pronounces. So there's no freedom. You just do it the way the language community is doing it. If you have a first name from a language you cannot speak, and I cannot speak Igbo at all because Igbo works with different Tonhöhen, heights of tune, which I cannot imitate. So if I introduce myself in Nigeria, people laugh because the name Ijoma exists also as a male and a female name, and the differentiation is more about like very subtle tune differences. So the way I pronounce my own name has nothing to do with the authentic name, which means I'm free to pronounce it the way I want. And sometimes I say Ijoma, then I say Ijoma. I actually, it was a change, like there was a colleague of mine who I liked very much and admired very much, and he always said, Ijoma, that sounds great, Ijoma. And then I changed myself, how I pronounced my name. And I thought, okay, that's the idea of real freedom and autonomy. It's only you who decides how to pronounce your own name.
Yeah, that's true.
How to pronounce Tara.
Yeah, we've been through the various pronunciations. I mean, my point was that I feel like it's a bit of a shame I can't pronounce my middle name, Tawa, in the way that it would originally have been or is pronounced by other members of my family. Mm-hmm. But you're right, there is an element of freedom and a kind of, but still, it's my name as it is and how I've grown up. So in
the Enlightenment, by Lessing and Nathan, there's always this idea that the adopted child, not the what's the natural child? The adopted child is the character with the biggest freedom because he is off the determination line of the biology. And in a way, it's the same with this kind of name.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's true. And I'm glad you mentioned Joyce because it stands out in that scene that your father's wife, that she understands you and that she's and that running through this, Miriam and I have been talking about this. There's a real gender aspect that is connected with the name, but in all sorts of other ways that maybe isn't as emphasised as an important part of the book. But I think for us, it really stood out as something that was really, really important. I've got lots and lots more questions, but I'm aware that we're kind of getting on with time. So I wonder if I might open it to the audience, and I can always come back with more questions afterwards. If anybody either here or in person, or if we've got a question from the online audience.
Kate is asking, what is the connection to and the significance of the crocodile? Was arriving at a title an arduous process?
Actually, the title comes from my lector, editor. Mm-hmm. It was his idea, and I liked it very much. But at that time, I didn't know how successful the title could be as a title. Sometimes, even like on Twitter or Facebook conversations in Germany, people say, "Oh, he's a German crocodile," meaning he has some African roots, but is completely socialized in German culture. So in that sense, it works perfect. I mean, it refers to a situation when I was a child. I never made bad experiences, but I was always afraid that something could happen. And then I realized at a certain point, I don't know, when I was 6 or 7 years old, that all my friends don't realize that something is wrong with me. And I thought it's obvious, but they didn't realize it. So I thought, okay, this danger is not as actual as I thought. But my mother had a wooden crocodile sculpture in our apartment, from black wood even. And I thought, oh no, the crocodile is a clear symbol of Africa. And then it's also black, the wood is black, and this kind of wood exists only in Africa. And usually crocodiles are green, but this crocodile is even black, which means it shows even more, it has something to do with Africa because people in Africa are supposed to be black. So I thought, that's really a danger. If my friends come home and see this sculpture, then they realize, this is not a normal family. This is a family that has something to do with Africa. And I knew I cannot go to my mother asking her to remove the crocodile because I had another problem. My mother was a psychotherapist. And the most important thing for a psychotherapist is you are not allowed to suppress anything. Verdrängung, it's a Freudian term. If I asked my mother to remove the crocodile, she would ask, oh, I see you have a problem with something. You shouldn't deny your father's, your ancestry, or how do you say? So I knew that wasn't a solution. And I had to live with that crocodile. And I was very relieved when I realized, even when my friends came and they saw the crocodile, they liked to play with it, but they did not conclude that it was proof of our special situation or special relationship with Africa. I couldn't understand why they were so dumb not to realize it, but they didn't. Yeah.
There's another connection with the crocodile, though, as well, which I think is really interesting.
Okay, right? Yeah, but that's only, that's, I guess, hard for me to tell because I guess I lack every word I need. Modelleisenbahn, I don't know, the small train you play as a child. I love playing with those, how do you say?
Model train set.
Model train set, yeah. And there's a famous locomotive.
Locomotive.
A famous locomotive from Switzerland. It's very long and green, and it's called Swiss Crocodile. And I like to get that Swiss Crocodile in small for Christmas. But I realized it's the most expensive locomotive you can buy by Märklin, that was the company. And I thought that's not good. You cannot wish the most expensive. Better the second expensive. And that's the German Crocodile, so it's called a little smaller version of the same kind of locomotive, also green, also long. And it's a series number 196, but it's called a German Crocodile. And so the expression, das Deutsche Krokodil, did exist before, but not in terms of people like me, but in terms of locomotives.
Yeah, exactly. But I think that it captures the connection of the Germanness and as you put it, your exotic addition to that. But it's a German term. And that exists in itself, and you complicate it and you disrupt it, which is good. Any other? Yeah, go ahead. Oh,
yes, talking about your mother, despite her idiolect or her idiosyncratic way of speaking, as you described it beautifully, there seemed to be one imperative, like communicate.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
After elementary school, you decide to go to this elitist Gymnasium, KFG, discovering all the abstract philosophical and literary concepts. What effect did it have, like coming back to Dossenheim, to your mother, to having conversations? How did it influence your relationship afterwards?
I think visiting this elite gymnasium has influenced me much more than I can express. I suppose it's like this. I mean, sociological questions are always very interesting for me. A lot of novels I admire, if it's Balzac or Marcel Proust or Ellen Hellenhurst, Line of Beauty, they are all about the what we call feine Unterschiede, the distinctions, the way, like Pierre Bourdieu explains how society works. I mean, who I am to tell you, you belong to the English class society, you know what I mean. And when I went to that, we call it humanistisches Gymnasium, which means you have Latin, Greek, and Hebrew at school. at a certain age, I realized that all the parents of all my friends are much richer. My mother and me, we were not rich. That was also something I approached to my mom, not explicitly, of course not, but implicitly. I thought, if mother only had kept my father, then we would be much better off, because it's always the father who earns the money. And no wonder we had no much money with the mother earning, even with such kind of a strange job like psychotherapist, which wasn't very common at that time. So I realized when I went to that school that there are social differences, and we are on the poor side. And then I started being ashamed of inviting my friends to my place. But then a little bit later, I realized, that leads to a lot of admiration by the parents of all my friends, because in Heidelberg, academic city, the bourgeoisie is defined Bildung und Besitz. I don't know how to translate it in English. Bildung is a very German expression. It doesn't mean education. It means something more, and Besitz means property. And the idea of the bourgeoisie is having both. And of course, they always have more property and less education, and they're ashamed of this. And my mother and me, we were the opposite. And I realized that the parents of my friends, they were admiring my mother for not having money, but going to the opera. I mean, if you have money and go to the opera, everybody can do it. It's nothing special. But if you don't have money and you go to the opera, that's really admirable. They really mean it with the cultural mission.
Okay, do we have any other questions from the audience, from the online? Oh.
Yeah, there are two questions about the translation, and one is asking whether you felt like in the translation something got lost, or that even your text gained something in the translation, and the other question is more about whether you still feel this is your story, reading it in English.
I start with the second question because my English is very awkward, and I always feel very in unease speaking English. In a way, it's a different story if I read it, especially because I really, you could hear it, it's exhausting for me to pronounce it. A lot of the words, I don't know the right pronunciation. So the vocabulary Ruth has used is much bigger than my own actual vocabulary. The first question was like, did it...
whether the text lost or gained something
okay.
in the process.
I think both, and it's always that way, but my English is too bad to make that judgment. But what I often realize, if she looks for a great solution by using an English saying, the sentence has another punchline than it had in German. And for me, of course, I like it very much because sometimes it's funnier than in the original version. I guess at the same time, sometimes something will get lost, but that is on a level I cannot check because of my bad English. But I mean, translation means always it's a passage from one life to another life, from one cultural world to another world, and things change during this travel. That's beautiful that things change. Otherwise, other language would be like mathematics. Like in mathematics, you can transfer things without loss, but in life you never can. Every transfer is not only loss; it's also you gain something else, and the original thing changes. And that's great. And it's like everybody who loves Russian literature but don't speak Russian. I mean, it's great. I always think if I only could read Pushkin in its original language, it would be a revelation. And dreaming of this is even, I guess, is maybe better than reading it.
Maybe. We're almost out of time, so we'll take your question afterwards. But thank you so much. We've really only scratched the surface, and we could have carried on talking for a lot longer. I'm glad we came to the translation at the end, because I was going to also ask about what your how the translation has affected you, and whether or not you were involved in the process as well. I assume you probably exchanged with Ruth
Yes.
about on ideas as well. But I can only just emphasize and recommend that our audience read the book, whether in English or in German or both, particularly because the translation contrast and the comparison is really interesting. And just to draw to a close, I have a few thank yous. I'd like to thank the DAD Cambridge Research Hub for German Studies, and especially Chris Young and Ingrid Hobbes for their support with this event, Sarah Colvin and the Schröder Fund also for additional support. Many thanks to Charlotte Woodford and the conference team here at Selwyn College for enabling us to host the event here, and to WaveFX and the event streaming team for making the hybrid event possible. I'm really glad that we had people viewing and asking questions from afar. Personal thanks to Miriam Schwartz for fielding the online questions and for also our discussions about the book. And finally, to Jerzy Ejimofo of Digitalback Books for instigating this, and of course, most of all, to Ijoma, and also Ruth Ahmedzai Kemp for writing and translating together the book, and Ijoma for taking the time to read for us today and come to discuss with us. And thank you all for coming.